Welcome back, Under the Sun listeners, for another episode of the Art and Science of Coaching. I'm your host, Coach Tim Hall, and I have a co-host, as usual, Coach Zach Gregg. Zach,
Hey.
we are back at it again, and I'm going to kick things off with I have a question for you. I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to know. This relates to the topic of our conversation today.
Okay.
Zach, what is your relationship with food?
See, you think you know, but do you? No. So, I'd say I have a pretty positive relationship with food. Yeah, but it is interesting, right? Like so a lot of people don't know my full background. I played collegiate sports before that, was heavily into weightlifting, all that stuff. So my approach to food has always been quantity based and trying to get as many calories in as possible because of the level of activity I've always had. So coming into cycling where everything's very weight centric and everybody's restricting and paying very close attention to how much they're eating and their calories and things like that from, almost the famine side of things is very interesting. So I think that coming into the sport a little bit later, I have a lot of stability when talking about my weight and talking about the things that I eat that other people don't have. And it actually made people really uncomfortable when I got into the sport and was talking about being big or beefy or, it's the middle of winter and I'm eating cookies and all this stuff. And it did totally make people uncomfortable. But I've never not been at race weight when I need to be. I've never gotten dropped on a climb because, I'm just a big old unit or something. There's always another reason, right? So no, food and I get along great. Sometimes a little bit too well, right? I'll leave things to the last minute with regards to making sure I'm at the weight I need to be at and all that stuff. So, no, I have a great relationship with food.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
I believe I do too, and it can relate to what you're saying. We've talked about how you and I both we didn't grow up cycling as a competitive sport. We played ball sports, and you're right. Our relationship to food and with that background is, and you transition to cycling, you go from quantity, which basically is the buffet style. I mean, you're just hitting the buffets hard. And then you come to this sport and you realize, ooh, that's stuff in your face is not a good thing. And then you have to confront yourself like, well, am I living to eat or do I eat to live? And so we're going to dive into all of this about our relationship to food and how in our sport, endurance sports in general, not just cycling, how it is a key component. We're going to dive into nutrition with our guest today, Emily Shields-Werner. Now, Emily has been on the podcast before. We told and talked about her story being in the sport and competing collegiately at Lees McRae. So we go way back, and her progression of education from Lees McRae to going to Wake Forest University and getting her master's in nutrition. So we are welcoming Emily to the show. How are you?
I'm good.
All right. Well, we appreciate you being here. And just to give a little bit of a background of why we've asked you to come on as a registered dietitian and a sports nutritionist to talk about nutrition. Emily is also a 3-time collegiate national champion in cyclocross as well as mountain bike. She races cyclocross professionally and resides now in Roanoke, Virginia. She was a North Carolina based athlete and student for quite a while, but she's in Roanoke now and has a pretty deep background in sports nutrition, not just for cycling, but for all sports. And so Emily is highly qualified to have this discussion and has been a part of presenting nutrition best practices to our team at Lees McRae. And so we've asked her to be here. We've got a good list of questions that we want to get into. So Emily, you're new in this profession. what has it been like so far for you? You've had a lot of change in your life in the last like year and a half, uh, moving and getting all these certifications and getting a personal practice off the ground. Now that you're doing it, how much fun is it?
I really enjoy it. I really enjoy working with all athletes and improving their relationship with food. Um, and then Kerry and I really love Roanoke. The riding is just so cool here. So yeah, it's been good.
All right, well, we're going to get straight into it. And you know, we've got a list of good questions of where we're going to try and shy away from just the basic general stuff and get into the weeds of some specific things, because there's a lot of content out there already about best nutritional practices in general terms in all the different scenarios. But first off, I want to ask, when someone reaches out to you needing help with their nutrition, you know, what are the first steps you go through with a new client, and then what are the services that you provide for someone reaching out to you for help on nutrition?
So either through my website, they'll get directed to a nutrition assessment form, or if they just reach out to me, like email me, I'll typically send that to them, and it'll have like their age, their sport, like approximately how much they exercise per week, how much they work per week, any vitamins, supplements they take. And then it has a 3-day food log. And I typically have them fill that out before we start working together. So I'll send that to them. And then a few days or however long later, they'll send it back to me, and then we'll schedule our first phone call. So that's kind of like the initial consult. And during that phone call, we can talk about what we can work on, like what changes I think can be made that are beneficial. And typically people sign up either, I prefer a month because they can do a month or a week, but a week just doesn't seem like enough time to make changes. If they're unsure, they can always sign up for a week and switch to a month. I don't mind that. And so once we start working together, either I can like provide recommendations, monitor what they're eating, really anything they need help with. And we can talk weekly on the phone, typically email daily. And then if they want meal plans, I can do that as well. Sometimes I like to make changes to what they're already eating without meal plans, but whatever works best for the client. So yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine the longer you work with someone, the more improvements you can make,
Mm-hmm.
because these are some pretty strong held habits that we have in
Mm-hmm.
relation to food, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, did you freeze?
No, I was just saying that our relationship to food, as we were saying, it's a pretty deep habit.
Oh,
So
right,
we're
right.
not going to break those habits in a week. I would think, in my mind, it's kind of like working with a client, writing workouts for them, prescribing workouts.
Right.
Like, you're not going to get fit or strong
Right.
in a month. But
Right.
it's going to take a bit more time for someone like yourself to really help someone make the habitual changes they
Right.
need for
Right.
better health.
Right. Yeah. Like most people I like to work with for more than a month. But I really think a month is a good place to start.
Interesting. Well, all right. So since the pandemic began, I'm sure that had to throw a monkey wrench into everyone's, dietary habits, because a lot more people are sitting at home, sitting on their butts a lot more, maybe exercising less or unable to even go out and exercise. You know, since you've experienced this yourself, being a professional athlete, what are there any, unique recommendations that you have made to help people combat this situation, or some best practices that you've been recommending or suggesting throughout this, through what we're going through right now?
So I was surprised, like when the pandemic started, or since it's been going on and like all the races are getting canceled, nothing's happening. I thought, people would be less interested in reaching out to me to work on their nutrition, but I think people have more time. So they figured this was a good time to work on it and make changes. So a lot of people are cooking at home more and eating out less, or they're doing like the meal delivery kits. So like I'll either help someone like choose better options from those, or look at like which ones are better than others, like which of the meal, there's so many different brands. The other thing you said with people aren't moving as much, I think some people get so tired of just like sitting at home in their home office, basement, etc. Like I encourage people to take breaks and just like go for a walk, because you know normally in everyday life they'd be walking around more, like to their car, to work, etc. But I think people are doing a lot of sitting, so I do recommend taking breaks. I think those are the two big things: taking breaks and then just helping people work on snacks to have at home and just what to cook at home, meal plan, etc.
And you kind of alluded to meal plans, and I came across, actually sent you a direct message through Twitter of this new app that's out there.
That was a scam.
It is, or you think it is?
No, I was worried that you never messaged me on Twitter, so I'm like, this must be a scam.
No, it's legit. It's real. I came across it the other night, and and of course, there's so many apps out there. This was an app to help you build a nutritional plan, and it would make recommendations and even recipes. And so, yeah, it's legit. Check it out. But from the technology that's out there, are there anything that you can think of or you use yourself personally, aside from just a food log and writing these things down? What are some maybe apps that would help people manage their nutrition? And then also with all of these delivery food services now, you know, not just deliver from the restaurant to your house, but then there's these programs that you can buy into who will, you know, send you some, you know, they'll send your meals on a regular basis. Are there any that, you know, you follow or utilize or recommend to people?
So, okay, for the first question for the apps, this is more like clients that I'm working with, but I like to use an app called Recovery Record. So it was developed for clients with eating disorders, but I really like to use it with so many of my clients because they just take a picture of what they ate and then it sends it to me and I can comment on it. So it's really cool because like I don't want people to get too caught up in the numbers and like measuring and weighing food. And so I can just see the picture and see their portion sizes and provide feedback based on that. And for a lot of clients that are really busy, like they don't have to enter everything into MyFitnessPal. Like this is a really easy way to do it. So that's probably my favorite app. Some clients come to me already using MyFitnessPal, and if they really want to continue doing that, they can, but I really try to get them away from focusing so much on the numbers. Like seeing if they're getting enough protein, that's fine, but like not focusing so much on every little calorie.
No, that's really interesting.
What was the second question?
Just these food services, you know, these programs that you can buy into.
Some of them seem better than others, just from my like brief experience. Like the Home Chef ones seem a bit more processed, higher in saturated fat and sodium. Like the HelloFresh and another similar one, they seem a little bit better, like more, some of them at least, like I've seen my mom and sister use, more plant-based, more vegetables, less processed ingredients. But yeah, I do think they're cool, and especially for people that don't have time to grocery shop, or during the pandemic, they did not want to grocery shop. I just think if you can recreate the recipes on your own, occasionally that would be good, just to eliminate all the packaging and waste that comes with them. Like everything is individually packaged. So yeah, like my mom likes to save the recipes and then just make it again. But if you don't have time to go to the store, then definitely I would encourage using them.
I like what you do about the photos. I think that's really cool, and heightening portion control. I mean, my background and Zach's background, I think that's where one of the biggest lessons I learned is I don't need all that food, and the portions were out of whack. And it didn't hurt us in those other sports, but in endurance sports, it can. And just how much more you can accomplish on less.
Mhm.
That's one of the things that's been real surprising to me as an athlete, is that you can be successful without stuff in your face, and portion control is a key component to that.
Right, right. But I do want to point out, like, you want to make sure you're adequately fueling. You don't want to eat too little, because people will get caught up into the numbers and they'll start to see how well they can do off so little, and that can develop into an eating disorder. So you still want to make sure you're eating sufficiently to fuel whatever sport you're doing. The other cool thing about the app is, like, you can say, like, how hungry or full you were before you started eating and after. So it just helps people get more in tune with their hunger and fullness cues.
That seems like a lot more sustainable way to look at things too, because you're almost taking pride in what you're eating because you have to share it with somebody. So yeah, that's fantastic. Maybe Tim and I will start sending each other pictures of our meals. And that'll keep us accountable.
Right. And, like, I do encourage people. I don't judge them. I want them to send me everything. Like, you don't need to eat perfectly. I mean, everyone knows I love dessert. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. But you're going to, right. But you're going to actually put it on a plate and put thought into it if you have to take a picture of it, which that's fantastic. So transitioning away from the pandemic and this new awareness almost that we're having about food, if people want a little bit deeper dive, are you recommending blood work as a way for them to kind of understand what's going on within their body? And, like, what could we learn if they opted to do that?
I do recommend blood work. So, like, Kerry, for example, always drags his feet about going for his yearly physical exam. But it's a really good idea to get blood work done when you're healthy, because, like, then you have a baseline. Like, for instance, I always talk about iron because I've had problems with anemia. Like, if I had gotten a blood test when I was healthy with my ferritin, I would know what level is normal for me, and, like, what level I perform optimally at. Obviously, once you're starting to have problems, deficient in anything, it's good to get blood work done, but it's nice to have a healthy baseline. And whenever athletes start working with me, I do ask them to send me any recent blood work, because sometimes there's things like, technically it's normal, but you want it to be a little higher as an athlete, a little more specific than just the ranges to the general population. So I always get them to send me that. And then, I mean, depending on the athlete and what their issues are, there's specific things you should get tested. Like, if they are under fueling, their vitamin D can be lower. If they're worried they have issues with their iron, I always recommend ferritin, because typically a doctor just will test for hemoglobin and hematocrit. But ferritin is your stores of iron, so that can detect a deficiency before you become full-blown anemic. So you can catch the problem earlier, and work on reversing it to get better sooner.
I think in my years as a coach, I've probably run into more athletes with an iron issue of some kind. And so it's a little, it's not as frequent as, say, maybe inflammation and congestion, respiratory wise. And, a lot of endurance athletes maybe will run into a little sniffles of illness, or pneumonia, or even mono. Mono seems to have kind of taken off in the last couple of years a little bit more, but iron seems to be one that cyclists in particular fall prey to a little more often than I was aware of before I got into this. And then once you're in that problem, you have that problem, boy, it's a major setback, isn't it?
Because if you are anemic, it takes about 3 months to recover from that, just for your red blood cells to reproduce. So you're at a higher risk for anemia if you are an endurance athlete, if you're female, because you're losing iron when you have your menstrual cycles, if you're a vegan or vegetarian. I think those are the main ones. So I think it also is more common because, like, more people are deciding to be vegan or vegetarian without really knowing what they need to pay attention to, which is fine. But, like, I do like to work with those people to make sure they're getting everything they need. But I definitely recommend getting iron related blood work.
Well, and then speaking of that, to the heart of iron specifically, what are the best food sources for iron? And then if one is taking a supplement, how much of a supplement should they take if they're in need of doing that?
Mhm. So if you're omnivore, and then red meat is the best source, oysters, eggs, but red meat, liver, that's the biggest source of iron. If you're vegetarian or vegan, like lentils, spinach, they all have some, but it's not as available as the iron in red meat, so you just don't absorb as much of it. So I mean, I recommend getting blood work first to see before you start taking a supplement. But if you are vegetarian or vegan, most likely I would recommend that you take an iron supplement. And then I have different brands that I like to recommend to athletes that are third-party verified. Some of them are easier on your stomach. There's so many different types out there these days. You can find something that you'll tolerate more likely and won't bother your stomach as much.
Well, hey, if you're comfortable saying what those brands are, I'll write it down now, because I have at times taken iron supplements, not because I've got a problem, but I am vegetarian and have been for almost 4 years now, and it's something I'm aware of, and I want to make sure I stay a step ahead of. And so, yeah, I mean, you can tell me now, or I want to get you to tell me afterward, because I want to make sure I take the right thing, because
Right.
as you said, not all supplements are created equal.
Right.
And for us endurance sport athletes, specifically in cycling, that third party verification is very important, don't you think?
Yes, yes. So, I mean, like in cycling, all sports, NCAA sports, the third party verification is really important to make sure you're not getting something that's illegal in the substance that's going to come up on a drug test. And just to make sure it's a good quality supplement, because like they're not regulated by the FDA. So anything could be in them, dirt could be in them. So I typically tell people to look for the USP logo. It's like the yellow on white, or that might be backwards. You can also go on their website and see supplements that are verified, or the NSF for sport. It's like white in a blue circle. Those both third-party verify supplements. 3 brands that I like for all supplements, not just iron supplements, are Thorne. It's like THORNE. Pure Encapsulations. I can also send this to you.
Okay, we'll add it to the show notes. Yeah, what's the other one?
The last one is Integrative Therapeutics.
Okay.
And like I know at some universities, the coach or dietitian, you can typically sign up for like a professional account to get a discount to then give it to your athletes. So that may be something you want to look into.
Well, and it's important. There's so much out there. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's not regulated. And us athletes and coaches have to stay on top of it, because the responsibility is on our shoulders. I don't know if when you won your national championships, if you got tested by USADA, or Zach, I don't think you've ever told me about being tested before, but you probably both have. And in the end, it's your responsibility, isn't it?
Definitely. You really need to stay on top of your supplements, be aware of what you're taking, because yeah, it's all on you.
All right. So from there, we've been talking about just kind of building this conversation as we're going through, which sort of leads us to something I think worth discussing, which is when you're working with a client or an athlete or making these recommendations, and Zach alluded to it earlier about how in other sports, it's not so weight driven. It's not such a daily conscious thing that's on their mind, because a lot of times bulk is good, but in our sport, weight plays a factor in our success in varying degrees. So when you're working with someone, how do you help them determine what is perhaps their ideal weight at any given point in the training or racing season? How do you come to that number?
So that's a great question. If they really want to know, so sometimes I will recommend, if they have access to it, to get body composition testing done, because then they can know what their body fat is. They can also make sure that it's not too low, because you need a certain amount of body fat for proper like hormone function, among other things. But typically, like, that's not really feasible and it can be expensive. So I prefer to help clients develop healthy eating habits, getting enough sleep, reducing stress, and making sure they're fueling their body properly. And then weight loss may or may not come along with that. Your body has a set point that it wants to be at, and it'll try really hard to keep you at that point. So if you keep trying to lose weight and that's not where it wants to be, it's going to slow your metabolism down and you're not going to be happy regardless. So like, for instance, like, we're not all going to be hill climbers. Some of us might be better at like sprinting sports. Like, we all have sort of a body type in sport that is best for us, which, you know, sometimes that's how we get into those sports. So I guess, like, short answer is I will look at what they're eating, and, you know, I'll make sure that they're getting the proper macros they need. If they're eating like too much fat or not enough fat, or if they're not eating carbs, like, typically we address those things. And sometimes body composition changes, and or weight loss will come along with that.
Right. And from a coaching perspective, like, you can do a lot more focusing on the positive aspects of diet and nutrition
Definitely.
instead of restricting to try and be a kilogram lighter and end
Yes.
up with whatever kind of issues.
Right, yes.
So yeah, same thing when speaking to athletes, you know, it's almost the toughest thing to do is get them to forget the watts per kilo chart and just focus on being the strongest version of themselves.
Right. And like, fueling for their strengths, like,
right.
they want to be strong at what they can be good at. And like, I typically tell people, especially if they're really numbers and weight focused, under fueling will have more negatives than slightly over fueling. So more harmful.
And from personal experience, right? If you're eating the things that are good for you in the proper amounts, you're not going to have an issue with this.
Right.
It's the lapses in judgment consistently over weeks and months, or the inattention to what you're actually putting in your mouth over long periods of time that are going to impact this number, right? So speaking of set points, yeah, if you were a little sloppy over Christmas, like I was, then it's going to be a little bit different number, right? But those habits and things remain, and you just get back to it. So
right. And I mean, I'm sure you don't have a significant change in your weight. Like, slight fluctuations throughout the year are normal. We also typically weigh more during the winter because biologically, you know, it's colder, to have more body fat to stay warmer, like from an evolutionary standpoint. But weight fluctuations are normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I've worked with some really good coaches, and basically it was like, go get your body comp done and eat better, like, you know, instead of trying to determine a real number. And I think that's something that everybody can kind of take away from this, is what they can recommend to their athletes too.
Right.
Well, you know, one thing I wanted to add right there is, it's a lot of times we as coaches, we get the question, or it just gets made as a statement to us about how someone's aiming to get to ideal race weight. And it's especially around this time that people are becoming more conscious of it. You know, if we're looking to race in the middle to late spring or early summer. And a lot of athletes are just, maybe they try to rush that process too much. And they'll restrict calories, or they'll work more and under fuel during the workouts. And as you said earlier about, you know, feeding to your strengths, you know, because it's your fuel source. As you're having these conversations, you know, one of the things, at least I try to convey, is that if you are actually in need of beginning to drop that weight, you need to look long term as you're doing it, because your body, it takes time for your body to adjust to that weight loss. And if you can do it over time, it's going to be more healthy for you. Are there any general guidelines or principles that you sort of recommend to, let's say that someone is a very thoughtful person when it comes to their diet lifestyle, and they're knowing it's a pre-planned winter weight and now it's gradually coming down. What are your recommendations of what is some general guidelines that they should focus on? And if you are slimming down, this is at the rate you should go. Like we do in training, there's a certain level of stress that you can put on someone over a period of time. You put too much and they'll overtrain. You put too little, they'll undertrain. You got to find that right mix. So what is that right mix for someone who is purposefully, intently, but also healthily slimming down?
Okay, so I have multiple things to say. So they don't want to lose weight too fast because that's not sustainable. I would say, especially for an athlete, like no more than half pound a week. And then, so ideally someone would, like, I don't like the mindset where people are like, race season's over, now I can eat a bunch of candy. Like, I encourage more, like, yes, you can have more candy, but like I encourage having a more steady relationship with food throughout the year, because then race season's over and you haven't been restricting yourself. You don't want to just go eat a bunch of junk food. So I got a little sidetracked here, but I think if you are trying to lose weight, like more fruit and vegetables, less fat, but still making sure you're getting sufficient fat. If you drop too low with fat, like that's not going to be good either. You need fat to absorb the fat soluble vitamins. And then still making sure you're getting adequate protein. That's one of the big things with weight loss. Still make sure you're getting enough protein. But also, like I like to tell people, so, you know, over the winter when you're not training as much, you do gain some weight, but then that's also naturally going to come off when you start training more, and when it gets less cold out. So like, I don't think people need to worry on it so much. Like, yes, you could pay more attention to what you're eating. Like maybe during the off season, you would eat like pints and pints of ice cream, maybe pay a little more attention to that, but you can still have some ice cream. Just pay a little more attention to your portion sizes. I really am a big fan of like everything in moderation. So there's no point like, oh, now it's race season, I'm going to cut out all ice cream, because like, I just don't think that's the best way to live.
It's a lot less fun, I can tell you that.
Yes. And like eating ice cream, like say you want to have ice cream one night, you're not going to see a negative output on your performance the next day. If all you ate was ice cream all day, every day, then yes. But if you have it occasionally in moderation, it's not going to negatively affect your performance.
Well, the only thing I would say about that is, and this is not really necessarily about nutrition as much as, you know, when you eat that ice cream is important, and how it's going to affect your sleep, because you don't want to be taking down a half a pint of ice cream right before you're going to bed. And you're spiking your blood sugar, and your body's having to process that. And I can tell you, I don't know about Zach's experience, but my personal experience, because I do love me some ice cream, I have to be careful when I have it, or else it'll disrupt my sleep. Or even if I do sleep well, I'll wake up the next day, HRV is not all that great, resting heart rate will be up, and it has a consequence. All these decisions that we make have a consequence. It could be good or it could be bad, and you need to learn what the consequences are for you. For me, it's, hey, I will eat some ice cream, but I make sure I do it early enough in the day, or not at a point at night where I won't eat past that, because it will disrupt things for the next day.
And I think that's also individualized. I think maybe that affects you where it might not affect others as much. So I do think it's important to pay attention to what affects your body, in different aspects, especially, you know, coming around the race season.
Right. Okay. So let's, our next big question is, what are some considerations for vegetarians and vegans? And, you know, things that they need to pay attention to make sure that they're going to be able to perform at their best.
So we already touched on this a little bit, but for both of them, the iron, so I won't go into that more. The other thing for vegans, they have to take vitamin B, because you only get it from animal sources, dairy, meat, eggs. So they have to supplement with vitamin B. And then for both of those, more so with vegans, is really paying attention and making sure they're getting enough protein. Because vegetarians still have the eggs, dairy, depending on the type of vegetarian they are. but vegans are only plant-based. And if you're only having plant sources of protein, you need to have more because you'll only absorb so much. So if you are vegan, I do recommend really paying attention to your protein, and it's probably a good idea to work with a dietitian to make sure you're getting everything that you need, especially if you're a newer vegetarian. So yeah, that's the main thing: the iron, the vitamin B, and making sure about the protein.
Yeah, I can attest to all of that. As a vegetarian, when and I set out to do it, not for some noble cause. I just tried it and found that I liked it. And naturally, everyone's question to me was, "Oh, where do you get your protein?" And I hadn't really fully investigated that as much as I should. But as I investigated it, I was actually surprised to find just how prevalent protein is in almost everything. And if you're eating the good stuff, that is, even if you remove red meat and chicken and all these other things, you can still get sufficient protein. And in fact, the quality of that protein is pretty good because of the sources. So, but you're right, but vegans have kicked it up a notch, and they have to pay much more specific attention. But if you're a vegan, your attention to detail is already pretty good because of every little thing that you're looking at.
Well, that's what I like to say. Like, you can't be a junk food vegan and be successful. Like, that's not going to work out well, especially as an athlete. And the big protein sources for vegans, like beans, they need to have a lot of beans. Quinoa, buckwheat is a complete protein. I'm missing others, but the big ones are beans and quinoa.
Well, you and Kerry are the ones who got me onto quinoa. I never forget you all staying at my house once, and I'm like, "Oh, what's this you're cooking?" And you're like, "Oh, this is some quinoa and some such." And I was like, "Quinoa?" And they're like, "You don't eat quinoa?" I was like, "Oh, maybe I should be eating quinoa if you're telling me." So yes, I get my fair share of quinoa and beans. I love nuts.
Yes, that's a good one. I meant to say peanut butter nuts.
Yeah, I eat a lot of different types of nuts. Not just, I love peanut butter, but a lot of variety of nuts, and I interchange the nuts that I eat between me in particular, cashews, almonds, pistachios. Nuts are expensive, but again, the lifestyle choice, if you want to call it that, it comes at a price. And
well, you're not spending money on meat, so you're saving money that way. So I think it balances out. And one thing I did want to say, just because so many people I don't think realize this, is make sure your peanut butter does not have the hydrogenated oils. So many people I talk to, then they go check their peanut butter and it has the hydrogenated oils. So see if you can find one without. Typically, it might not be stirred as well. You can find ones that are, though, just because that's man-made and very bad for you.
Well, maybe we should just talk about our favorite peanut butter brands. And of course, Zach, he's got, has an allergy of some sort and focuses on almond butter. Zach, maybe you can explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm sensitive to peanuts. But yeah, with the same thing, you want to find an almond butter that has like 3 ingredients or less, right? It's like almonds and salt are pretty much the only things you need in your almond butter.
Yes, I recommend that for peanut butter as well. Sometimes it's hard to find ones without palm oil. Palm oil is not bad for you, but it is very bad for the environment. So if you can find just peanuts and salt, that is ideal. I do like almond butter as well, and I'd like to get it from Costco and peanut butter.
Yep.
Well, when I made that decision to stop eating meat, I've noticed how my taste for peanut butter, pure, natural peanut butter, has evolved over the years. And right now, in the past year or so, I love Justin's peanut butter, the natural honey-based peanut butter. It's delicious. But you're right. Not all peanut butter is equal, and some is actually bad for you. So look at those ingredients, and and over time, it's one of those things where it's a little thing, such a little thing, but that little decision adds up into a really big thing over time. Because I don't know about you all, but I consume a lot of peanut butter. So
well, I don't consume any. And it's,
you make up for it in other areas.
Right. We can't.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say we can't bash certain brands because that would, not be great. But this is like the one thing. So Eric Hill, the director of Project Echelon, is like arguably like the closest thing to like a high functioning pair of humans. You know what I mean? Like he just does twice as much as everybody else. But his one thing is he buys the big box brand peanut butter, and collectively we get on him for it. So hopefully he's listening to this. And if the one thing he takes away from our conversation is that he needs to change peanut butter brands, he should.
Come on, man.
Come on, man.
I just think it's so funny. Like sometimes cyclists pay attention to such little details, like
Yeah.
cutting grams on their bikes and like that weight and just, but then other things.
And you know what? This is the only time I didn't write it in the list of questions. It's the only time I'm going to say it. We won't even talk about your alcohol. All right. We're not even going to talk about alcohol because it's a touchy subject. And if we give you the truth, you're not going to like the truth. So
moderation.
Yeah. Moderation. There you go. Okay. So, and in speaking about, okay, these lifestyle diet choices, for whatever reason you're choosing them, you know, and you talked a little bit earlier about iron and taking supplements and what to look for if you're taking supplements. In general, what are your thoughts on should athletes take supplements? And if so, and of course I would think this goes to the heart of their diet in general, but you know, if so, what are the most common and best recommendations you have for endurance athletes?
Okay, so first of all, supplements, you are right, should not make up for poor food choices. You should try to make changes to your diet first. I also recommend I've said this, but getting blood work done before I recommend supplements just to see what your levels are, and not get to toxic levels or anything. So definitely iron if you have a history of iron deficiency anemia. I think vitamin D, especially in the winter. We are cyclists, so we spend a lot of time outside in the summer. But even if you wanted to take it year round, I take it year round. It's not going to hurt you at a lower level, like 2,000 units during the summer or every other day during the summer, but take it every day during the winter. Typically, we're low in vitamin D. And I mean, you've probably seen, there's been research that those with higher levels of vitamin D have had better outcomes if they've gotten COVID. There's so many benefits to vitamin D. I just thought of this now, but I was thinking back to the vegetarians, potentially making sure they're getting enough calcium or taking a calcium supplement, just for good bone health. If you're having stomach issues, if you've taken antibiotics recently, I recommend probiotics. I'm just a fan of probiotics. Also needs to be a good brand to make sure it's actually going to have a better chance of getting to your gut. And I mean, it is a little individual based. Depending on the athlete, sometimes I recommend like turmeric if you're having a lot of inflammation. I mean, you want some inflammation for recovery, but if you're having a lot of soreness, sometimes if people can't sleep or they have trouble with restless legs at night, I recommend magnesium. But I do think the main ones would be iron, vitamin D. Oh, fish oil. I am a fan of fish oil. Typically, as Americans, we don't get enough omega-3s in our diets. We get more omega-6s. So I recommend taking fish oil, especially I can also send you this, Tim, but with a higher DHA level, like you need the EPA and the DHA. But I recommend taking them year round. And then if you got a concussion, you want to take a lot of fish oil, I can also send that to you, Tim. There's a good guidelines of if you have a concussion, what to take for how long. It's one of the few things that there's research that shows that can help with concussions. It's fish oil. I mean, besides like rest, avoiding screens. So yeah, those are the main ones.
That's probably the one area I'm weakest at is the fish oil aspect and the benefits that they bring to the table with my diet. And
I'll send that to you.
Yeah, please do. I could benefit from it. And it sounds like with what you were just describing, it kind of comes down to, hey, what you can almost pinpoint the deficiency you might run into. I'll tell you, you know, as an example, where I lived before coming to North Carolina, the one big distinction of moving from there to here is in the wintertime, because where I'm from, we don't get sunshine in Middle Tennessee hardly at all during the winter. It's always overcast. They'll forecast sunshine, but it never would show, and we'd never receive the benefit. But you know, from living here in the Banner Elk area for many years, during the wintertime, we get a amazing amount of sunshine here.
Mhm.
And I noticed it right away. It makes a huge difference in just how you feel, how you think. And it's one of those just overlooked aspects of life. But to that point, it's like you can almost pinpoint what that deficiency is through all these different mechanisms. Either you can identify it with your own eyes or through blood work or whatever. And it sounds like what you're saying is let's just pinpoint the things that you need at any given point in the year to address that deficiency. Maybe it's vitamin D, maybe it's, but whatever it might be, and it not be sort of a cast one big giant wide net out there. It is get more specific to what it is that your needs are at the time.
Mhm. Mhm.
And this is only a fun anecdote because I did a senior project on it. But fish oil also helps tremendously with muscle atrophy if you ever have a limb immobilized due to injury.
Mhm.
Mm.
So if you ever break your wrist or something, fish oil and train the other arm. But yeah, so basically what we're saying is you need to find a good supplement company and invest in some of these things because they have a lot of really good things they can do for you.
Mhm. And yeah, we don't need enough fish to get the benefits from it. Like,
And the fish we do eat is garbage.
yeah.
if it's farm raised, like sorry, it's just not that great.
Mhm.
So try and find non-farm raised fish if you can. But it is a struggle, especially living in the mountains of North Carolina, right? There's not many lakes and streams up here that have big high quality salmon in them. So
Hey man, this is the South. That's why we got fried chicken, man.
yeah, exactly. Which is
That's a
probably
Southern
better
thing.
for you than farm raised salmon. So okay, well, let's move on to the next question. So we have touched on, let's do a nutritional considerations specifically for women. And we've touched on this a little bit, but yeah, it'd be great if you'd reinforce some of those points.
Okay, so we have touched on it a bit. The biggest thing is iron. And another big thing is, especially for all like college women out there, if they're not having periods, that's bad. Like, it used to be portrayed as, oh, you're a real athlete or you're training a lot, you're really strong. But if you're not having your period, or if it's not regular, then you're most likely bordering on low energy availability, or there could be another problem going on. So really pay attention to that. And then I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but there's some research that during women's luteal phase that they need more sodium because they're more prone to hypernatremia. So that still just goes back to listening to your body. Like, if you crave salt, you might need a little more electrolytes while you're training. The liquid IV at Costco, I really like. I mean, you can get it elsewhere too, but it's cheapest at Costco because it has a much higher sodium content. I just find on like longer rides, especially in the summer, I feel like I really need more salt. So I think those are the big things: paying attention to hydration and iron for women. But I mean, men need to pay attention to that too. So.
Yeah, and I know that one of the topics we want to eventually dive into a little more deeply, and more research and more voices are beginning to come out because the research is getting a little bit deeper. In fact, I found a news source yesterday. In fact, I sent it to Zach, and I was going to send it to you too, about research in the realm of the menstrual cycle and how it affects performance. And you and I have had this conversation many times before, one-on-one, and we want to get into that at a later time. There's just so much more new emerging research that needs to be done, is being done, and it's fascinating because it's such a big part of just lives of women in general.
Right.
Forget about if you're an athlete, and
Right.
then throw in athletic performance into it, and it could be one of the new frontiers for women if you as a person know how to address it for yourself, which might not be what's best for you in general terms.
And one thing I want to point out, like, you may think like, oh, I'm not having my periods, I'm fine, but like, it doesn't matter if I'm not fertile, I don't want to have kids anytime soon, but it can damage your bones and your bone density. And that is one of the significant long-term effects. So you don't want to just forget about it.
Yeah, well, and I mean that's a topic we also talk with our athletes. One of my our women athletes about just bone density in general. And it's one of the reasons why we are adamant about getting into the gym, developing the habits of going into the gym and doing some strength training to develop these habits, one, to improve performance now, but also just lifestyle habits down the road, because bone density is important for everyone. It's important to me as someone who's over 50 years old, but it's always important to women, and it should be for everybody. And so, yeah, all these things are kind of interrelated.
Right. And I mean, you do want to make sure, like, if they are lifting, that they are fueling well, because otherwise it's not going to be beneficial to their bones if they're under fueling. And I mean, same with males. And typically, if males are under fueling, you can also, if they get blood work done, you can look at their testosterone levels, and typically they'll be decreased. But they can also have effects on their bones. It goes, under fueling is less diagnosed in males, because typically society has made it more of a female issue, like, oh, males, don't worry about what they look like under fueling. Anyways, that's another topic. But
well, transitioning from there, we've already talked about, had on my list, iron, but we've covered iron pretty good.
yeah.
But this next one, I think, covers a large swath, be it male or female, and it's something that I'm living right now. I'm living this, and you two are eventually going to live it. You're going to go through it, just like I've been going through it the last 5 to 10 years. And that is, what are some things that masters athletes who are 40 plus, 50 plus, and even, I know, Emily, with your parents, and they're still active. They still ride and run and get after it. At 60 plus, what are things that, as we're aging and we're still active and getting after it, on top of this stuff we're talking about, what are some special considerations for masters athletes?
So I feel like I keep talking about protein, but their masters athletes, especially over 50, need more protein to stimulate muscle protein sensitive. Their muscles just become less sensitive to smaller amounts of dietary protein. So you recommend more like 35 to 40 grams of protein per meal as a master athlete. And then there's also research that shows having protein snack before bed will help with the recovery overnight and not depleting muscle glycogen stores as much. So the protein, paying attention to hydration, which we did also talk about, but as you get older, you lose your thirst sensation, and your sweat glands produce less sweat, and it takes more time to replace body fluids if you're dehydrated. So pay attention to hydration. You do still need glucose and electrolytes, not just water. But like, I know with my dad, for an example, like, he'll go through the whole day and feel tired and crappy, and it's because he hasn't drank any water.
Guilty as charged.
Yep.
Yes. And I tell people, don't overdrink. You don't have to force yourself. Ideally, you want your urine to be a pale yellow, not clear all the time. I also have had people I've worked with who, like, he would chug a liter of water before his rides, and then I think he was becoming hyponatremic when he started his ride, and it felt like he was bonking like 10 minutes into the ride. So pale yellow, don't force it, but don't go throughout the whole day without drinking. Try to have something around. And coming back around to the masters athletes, the other thing is vitamin D and potentially B12 supplements, just because the utilization and absorption is impaired with aging. So back to the vitamin D and potentially B12.
Well, I can tell you, me personally, I didn't really begin to notice how I felt, changes in how I felt, until I got past 45. And as I was getting closer to 50, I could tell that my ability to recover quickly was a little diminished, and that I began to enjoy total days off more. And I got more out of total days off. And now that I'm, in my early 50s, I even exercise that even more. I'll still get after it. I still put in a lot of work, but that rebound, even if I do all the protocols right, I do everything right, it's much more difficult to wake up after on a Monday or after a really hard day or back-to-back days. It takes a little more out of you, and you could be doing all the right things. And so you got to just be, take care of yourself and be don't be so hard on yourself all the time as you begin to age, because you can learn the hard way and it can put you in a ditch. And boy, it gets difficult to dig yourself out of that.
Yeah, rest is really important and sleep is really important.
All right. So, what are some of the big improvements people can make by stopping the consumption of certain foods? So, what are some common foods that people should stop consuming, either in such large quantities or just totally? And what effect would that have on their life?
So I would say, like, the biggest thing, I mean, I think sometimes this is less common in cyclists because they already naturally pay more attention to what they're eating, but like less fast food, less junk food, like not just always eating pizza in the calf. Um, Trying to eat more whole foods, more plant-based. You don't have to have meat at every meal. Um, I think having more plant-based can reduce inflammations. You can recover better, feel better. Um, and then this is a bit of a sidetrack, but trying not to skip meals, like not going throughout the whole day and then being like, I haven't eaten enough and making up for it at dinner. And that goes back to protein as well. It's better to spread your protein consumption throughout the day instead of like realizing you didn't have any during the day and then having a ton at dinner. Like your body's not going to absorb that. So yeah, I think less processed, less ingredients on the food labels. If there's like a massive list and you don't know what half of them are, that's not ideal. And then more whole foods if possible.
Well, and I think going back to something you said earlier about, and this is something I've really liked about you and your family and Kerry, is you enjoy the good life. You know, you will enjoy the good things, be it sweets or having a good craft beer, or good delicious food. You're both good cooks, and I think that's something I've always really admired in you all, and moderation. Just you can find a way. You don't have to necessarily sometimes cut things out cold turkey, though there are some things probably best you did. When you say that, one comes to my mind is sodas. You know, I just don't see any benefit whatsoever to, as drinking sodas on a regular basis. There's a moment where that can really maybe give you that boost you need
Like
to,
after a 5-hour ride.
yeah, to get home. If you got to climb up Valley Cruces to get back to campus, boy, at Mass General, that Coca-Cola might be the thing that gets you up that 30-minute climb. So, but Zach, you probably can think about, I go back to our previous lives, things that you would do. Forget about the total amount of food we used to eat, which was just stupid. What are some things that you used to consume and eat back then that you don't even think about now? It's like, no way, I just don't even do it.
Oh man, I think the highly processed thing is the biggest, and I think I get better, like every month, year at reducing the amount of highly processed stuff. One thing was those big Texas cinnamon rolls. Do you remember those? They're, oh man, they're 550 calories in a cinnamon roll in a package, and they last for decades. And, yeah, so before practice, if I needed a boost, I'd have a big Texas out of a vending machine. How far we've come, right? So yeah, I think the process stuff, and yeah, even I mean on the bike, I'm pretty resistant to using packaged foods, especially highly processed stuff like a gel outside of a race, and kind of for the same reason as we don't drink sodas just sitting around, like the insulin response and just the general sugariness is just not necessary when you could have something in its place that's actually probably going to be more satisfying, and definitely has fewer artificial ingredients in it.
Right. I do think though, like while you're riding, that is the time to have the sugarier things, because you need it and you'll use it. It's fine if you want to try to use other sources than gels or blocks, but I don't think they're necessarily bad for you.
One of the things that you said a second ago about, I can just give an anecdotal personal experience. One reason why I continued my vegetarian approach was what happened to me early when I started it. I noticed immediately within a week, in the first 2 weeks, when I cut out meat entirely, I uh, the inflammation in my muscles disappeared. And I didn't even realize that I was carrying daily constant inflammation where I had soreness and just how I felt. Once I stopped eating meat, immediately the response was I noticed that my general soreness all throughout my body just disappeared.
How
And
much
that
were
was,
you eating
huh?
before? How much meat were you eating, and like red meat, or was it did it vary?
Yeah, it varied. It wasn't every meal, and I never would cook meat at home. It was largely if I went out to dinner someplace or if I was eating at the cafeteria at school, and I never really had meat at the house.
Mhm.
But it was a noticeable change, and it surprised me, and
Okay.
and I felt better. I just felt better, and that was the biggest contributing, motivating factor for me to just say, oh, well, I'll continue this,
Mhm.
and that's maintained. I get muscle soreness now when I get into the gym, and I'm really, if I do some deadlifts or squats, then I'll really feel some muscle soreness. But in general terms, from cycling, it takes a 5 or 6 or 7 hour ride for me to feel it the next day. Otherwise, no, I don't. Whereas before, I didn't even know that I was feeling sore every day until that got removed. And
Mhm.
it was a strange feeling for me personally to go through, but that was a motivator for me. I don't know if anyone else has ever had that experience, but that you said something earlier about inflammation,
Mhm.
and there's different ways that we inflame ourselves, and it's an inhibitor of growth. And in some situations, inflammation could be good to help promote growth or adaptations, but in other situations, it's not. So yeah, that's just a personal story that has always stuck out to me because it motivated me to keep going.
Mhm. And I do think it's important to circle back around, like, it is individual based. Like, you should do what makes you feel good. Carrie would love to be vegetarian, but we've tried before, and then like my ferritin literally just drops, regardless of the supplements I'm on. So one day, yes, we probably will be, but not while I'm racing. But also, like, too much meat is also bad. So it's really just a balance and what works best for you to make you feel best.
Yeah. All right. Well, and touching on just recovering and being a master's athlete, or even if you're in the prime of your lives, like you two, at the elite level, professional level, what what are the best foods to help with recovering from hard workouts and races? And not only the foods, but the amount and the timing of all that.
Okay, so I think I've talked about this before, like I've ranted on about it, but you need more than just protein after hard workouts or races. You also need carbs to replace your muscle glycogen, and to help absorb the protein properly. So typically you need more carbs than protein. So a general recommendation is after a workout or race, depending on your size, is 15 to 25 grams of protein, and then you should have 3 to 4 the grams of carbs. So for instance, if you're having 15 grams of protein, you want 45 to 60 grams of carbs along with that. So ways to have this: chocolate milk. So if there's not enough protein, sometimes I like to add protein powder to the chocolate milk. Protein powders are supplements. You want to make sure they're verified or a good brand. Um, so chocolate milk and protein powder. A lot of college students, it would most likely probably just be chocolate milk, but that's fine. Maybe have some yogurt with it. Greek yogurt has the highest amount of protein, so typically I recommend Greek yogurt. Um, with not zero fat if possible, unless you're having a fat source with it, like whole milk. But I recommend like the middle, like 2% or whole fat, not zero fat, because you need the fat. Another example, if you're having yogurt, just yogurt after, also have some granola with it, for more sugar in the carbs. I really like to make smoothies for after workouts or races, because
Zach's needing and wanting to get on the smoothie train.
oh, well, you can just like, you can put so many things in them. You can put fruit and vegetables in. When we were at home, I make them for my dad all the time because I can hide vegetables in them that he would otherwise probably not eat. Easy way to get protein. Eggs and toast, you could even have that after. But yeah, those are the main things.
Well, and also maybe elaborate more on, you said something about fats. and that, fat can be your friend.
Yes.
It's an important part of being of a diet as an endurance athlete. Maybe speak about fat for a little bit, about good fats, how it helps, what it helps promote, and how it is necessary and beneficial.
Okay, so yeah, people have become fat phobic, especially with the zero fat phase and the low fat phase. So, and like typically, so yogurt, for example, if you're getting a zero fat one, sometimes that has more sugar added or like artificial things. The ones with fat in them just typically taste better. So you need fat to absorb your fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. You need it for proper function of hormones. You need fat to protect your vital organs. You don't want too much, but you need some fat to protect them. What was I going to say? Right, yeah. So some people are afraid of fat and they cut out all sources of fat in their diet, but you need, I mean, if you're looking at the numbers, you want 20 to 30% of your calories to be from fat, even up to 20 to 35, even up to 40 would be okay. The good sources are, nuts, seeds, dairy. It's fine to have fat from meat, just, not too much to limit it, because that's a saturated fat. But the unsaturated fats are avocados, nuts, seeds. I think those are the main ones. I'm probably missing things, but
yeah, it's a key component. You cannot neglect it, overlook it. And we were having this conversation at Zach, I think yesterday, we were talking about fat and how I can recall being in college when the low fat or no fat phase was really ramping up. And like you just said, when the fat gets removed, then other things get added, and those things are not necessarily good for you. And so it's just something it's not a bad word. Fat is not a bad
right.
word.
I try to tell people to make sure they're having some carbs, protein, and fat at each meal and snack to make it more balanced.
All right.
But yeah.
Well, and this is probably not a good segue into the next topic we want to talk about, but talking about fat leading into how we cyclists, we love our sweet stuff. We love chocolate, we love pastries, we love cookies. I think everybody does. All right. It was not just specific to us. And you in particular, you are a renowned pastry chef. You make amazing cupcakes and pies and cakes and such. How do you, number one, how do you satisfy your sweet tooth, and how should others satisfy their sweet tooth in a healthy way?
Okay, first of all, did you see my mermaid cupcakes?
I did. Those are amazing.
I really like how those turned out. But anyways, so I like to say, I've said this, but everything in moderation. If you restrict it and completely eliminate it, then you're going to be more likely to binge. Like it's going to come into your house or whatever, and you're going to be more likely to binge. If you know you can always have it, you'll be less likely to want it, or just in smaller amounts. So that's why I say moderation. I don't like to say like good or bad, but I do have like some healthier desserts that I like to make too. Like it's like a sweet potato pudding, or I have an avocado pudding recipe. I'm not a big pudding person, but these are really, really good. And then I also add protein powder if I'm having it at night, especially like after a hard workout. So I could send you those recipes. I really like both of those, and you can make them just like in a blender or food processor. But then it's okay to also have like quote unquote unhealthy desserts. It doesn't always have to be the healthier ones. Just everything in moderation. And if you notice it bothers your sleep, like you, Tim, maybe have it right after a long ride. I think having some is fine. Just, don't overdo it.
All right, there we go, Zach. You should have grabbed that second cookie at lunch yesterday.
Oh man. But this is a recovery week, Tim. I'm actually following moderation. All right.
We talk about this every day, Emily. Hey, like you said at the beginning of the show, it's our relationship to food, and it's a big part of everybody's life. It is such a huge part of our lives, just like sleep and work and exercise. Food is right there high on the list of priorities, and sweets rank right up there too. So, well, good. All right. We only have a couple questions left we kind of wanted to talk about, but we're curious, as we said off the show, we want to kind of dig into not just the science, but then there's the art, and then there's like what we actually do. It's what we're trying to share, things that I do or Zach does or people we know, what they do to help them be successful. And I know some of this stuff because I'm close with you and your husband, Kerry. Like what for you and yourself, dietary wise, what works? What have you found really works for you? You've always been really health conscious, and I think Kerry has been too. But what really is working for you right now? Like what are you doing as you're transitioning? Been through this pandemic, what are some of the habits that really stand out for you personally that work for you best?
Okay, so that's a good question. So well, like sometimes, like it is easy to eat well because Kerry is such a good cook. He does all the cooking. I only like to bake. Um, so that is helpful. But some things that I like to do. So I find that I need more snacks than Kerry. Like if we've eaten breakfast and then we wait a few hours to ride, like if I don't eat a snack right before, then I will be starving like very soon into the ride. If I am going out and running errands and grocery shopping a lot, I always try to take some sort of snack because I just don't like getting to the point where I'm starving and bonking, because that's not good. I'm not going to be recovering, repairing muscles. One thing Kerry and I feel like we both improved upon is being better about having something right after rides. Like sometimes if you're like, oh, I'm eating dinner in an hour, I don't really feel like having something, but you did a big workout. And like sometimes if you do a big workout, you don't even feel hungry, like you don't want something. We do try to make sure to have something, if it's a smoothie, because that's easy, or even just chocolate milk and protein powder. So I feel like we've paid more attention to that. And then I personally have just paid more attention to make sure I'm eating enough and eating meals and snacks regularly. Even like during the season, like sometimes during cyclocross, it feels like you're training less, but there's other factors that play into it, like being cold all the time or like constantly moving. So I think those are the big things. Kerry and I, he likes to try to eat less meat, which we do. We don't eat it every night, but we do still eat it some, mostly because of me and my concerns about my iron. But yeah, I don't know. Those are the big things.
Yeah, well, you two, the times you both have stayed with me have helped me to have even before I became vegetarian, helped me to have a greater appreciation for delicious food that doesn't include meat. I think that also played a part in me just realizing I can still eat well and enjoy the food without the meat. And then the more I did that, the more I liked it. And you two definitely played a role in helping me do that. And I think one of the things, as you were talking there, that now stands out, and we don't have to go into this now, but I am curious at some point. We haven't even talked about blood sugar levels, the glycemic index, and that sort of thing, and how, like, the difference between you and Kerry, for example. You need to keep snacking, whereas he'll be okay, and other people are the same way, or like you, where snacking throughout the day is going to help keep their energy levels up, so that when you do get on the bike and do a workout, you're not going to bonk, you're going to feel good. Whereas some other people, they're okay. They can wait until they start training, then start eating.
Right.
And so it's very individualized, but
it is. It is very individualized. Like I used to think like, how do I need something if Kerry doesn't? But then I feel like I was under fueling. So I don't know how he does it. I don't know if it would be better if he ate more regularly, but then maybe he eats more at night. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. Kerry's also just a really weird case. Like he does not get tired. I do not understand it. It's very frustrating at times. Like I have learned that I need to do less. I cannot do as much. I don't think he is human. But everyone, yeah, you are different. So it is important to pay attention to what you need and what works best for you.
Yeah, that's great. So to wrap this up, do you have some tips or habits that will help people increase their awareness and knowledge of the things that they're consuming?
So I think it can be helpful for some people to do just a really general food log. You don't have to count calories. You don't have to look at labels. Just like write down what you had during the day. Like I had eggs and toast for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and do it for a couple days and look back at it and see, like, was I getting enough protein? Like Tim said, was I having vegetables? Did I have fruit? Like, how often am I eating meat? I think it's just a good way to step back and look what you're eating, because like we're so busy, we get so caught up. You might not even have, you might have skipped eating one day. Like, some people do that, especially if they don't exercise as much. So I think paying attention and just being more in tune is a good way to start. And then I have talked about protein, but also to make sure you're having some fat. And then back to the protein, like I typically, if people do want to calculate, like if they're listening to this and they're vegetarian or vegan and they are concerned, I typically recommend 1.2 to 2 grams of kilograms body weight. So take your body weight from pounds, convert it to kilograms, and then 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight, and try to spread that out throughout the day, not just at dinner. So if you want to check that, and I think just doing a general food log, also put hydration on that and water, because then you might realize, oh, I'm not drinking enough water. So yeah, that's the big thing.
I agree with that food log, and it is beneficial. My first coach, only coach that I've ever hired, he was on our last episode, Todd Nordemeyer, and that when I first began working with Todd, that was the first thing he did with me as he was prescribing workouts, is he had me write down all the things I was eating and send it to him, just so he had a perspective of how I was fueling myself. And he made some recommendations, based on what I was sending him. And it did create a greater awareness at the time, this was like 2005. And I think at the time I was a Cat 3, and it's like you're at a different place in your athleticism when you're going through these different levels. So food log is definitely a tool. You might not have to do that long term once that awareness is created.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Well, Emily, you've shared a lot of great insight and tips today. We thank you for all of that, and I've always enjoyed talking to you and picking your brain and learning through these conversations with you. So I can take that info, Zach can take that info and share it with other people, and that we've recorded this is good, so we can now point people in this direction. But how can our listeners keep up with you and follow you? I know you have a new website that you just launched. So tell people about that, and where are some good places for them to keep up with you?
So people can reach me at my website, which I guess you can also put in the notes, but it's emilywernersportsnutrition.com. And then they can also email me at emilywernerrdn@gmail.com. I can also send that to you. You can also reach me on Facebook, Instagram. But yeah, follow me. Instagram's probably the main one. And there will be.
Just know that if you follow Emily on Instagram, you're going to be tempted to put in an order of cakes and cupcakes and pastries. You will be tempted. So, but we will include all that in the show notes, and for the listeners to click on and learn about. So, Emily, thanks for being on the Art and Science of Coaching today. Great information, great conversation. Thanks always.
Yeah, thanks for having me.